Okay. All right, kids. Let's all sit down and start this very distinguished panel. We might even have a few more to come. I have no idea how this is going to work. What's our title? Our title is what? How to Build America Back Again? Make America Great Again? Make the economy great again? Again. Right, that's exactly right. So I'm Larry Kudlow. I'm here with House Republican Whip Steve Scalise, who is truly a great American. Jason Smith, the, I'm going to say, future House Budget Chairman. Is that right? All right, Ways and Means. I'm sorry. Whatever he wants. Another great American. And my dear friend Bob Lighthizer, who was the single best trade rep in American history. All right, I'm Larry Kudlow. I want to hear from our panelists, and we may get the spare senator or two if they come back after their votes. But my opening thought is what the Biden administration has done is take a very healthy economy that was growing at over 6% with less than 2% inflation and a V-shaped roaring recovery from the terrible pandemic consequences of 2020. And in 18 months, they have run that economy into the ground so that the first half of this year, GDP will be shrinking. We're either in a recession or at the front end of a recession. The inflation rate is running, depending on your measurements, upwards of 8 to 10 or 11%. Real wages are falling. Real retail sales are falling. Manufacturing is falling. Employment is slipping, although weekly unemployment claims have been up about 70,000. That's not a good indicator. I am a long-run optimist. I always am. But I will just say that the demise of the economy in the past 18 months shows that this sort of radical progressivism, what Newt Gingrich calls big government socialism, does not work. Does not work. Once again, we have seen this illustration. And the government takeover of the economy, which, you know, may be stymied by the recent Supreme Court decision, West Virginia versus EPA. It's a brilliant decision. But I want to raise this other point. You know I'm a tax cutter and I'm a supply sider, and we should make the Trump tax cuts permanent, and we should understand the incentives inherent. When you tax something less, you get more of it. When you tax something more, you get less of it. The Bidens have forgotten that, if they ever did learn it. But I also want to raise one other point, the regulatory story. My friend Steve Forbes calls this modern socialism through the regulatory state. The war against fossil fuels is a perfect example of that, but it's not the only example. There's a war against businesses and things like price controls and antitrust. I mean, throughout the government, the Green New Deal, the radical climate activism going on. But regulations hurt a lot, and the regulatory state is one of the reasons the economy is contracting. I just want to read you, in 2021, okay, the last year we have data, federal agencies finalized rules that entail $201.5 billion in net regulatory costs, 201.5, making it the second costliest year on record. To put this in perspective, President Biden's 2021 regulatory costs are 3 times those added in Obama's first year and nearly 40 times more than in President Trump's first year. That's what he's done with the regulatory state. Economists estimate that federal regulations now impose a total economic cost, that is the net present value, of $2 trillion per year. $2 trillion per year net present value of regulatory costs. That's remarkable. It's like strangling enterprise. That's what they've done. And so we shouldn't be shocked between the inflation of the big spending and the regulatory strangling of the economy and the war against fossil fuels, more generally the war against business, and more generally the war against free market capitalism has, as I said, taken a healthy economy down. By the way, the regulatory costs are running almost 1% of GDP per year. You lose 1% of GDP per year. All right. What I'd like to focus on with our distinguished group is how to solve this, how to get the economy back on track, how to generate a recovery. You know me, I've said for a long time the cavalry is coming. It can't get here soon enough for my taste. So let me, let me turn it over to one of the five-star generals leading the cavalry, Mr. Steve Scalise.
Wow. Well, first, welcome everybody here. Good to see all of you, and always great to be with my friend Larry Kudlow. We got to work really well together when he was in the Trump administration in the White House. You want to talk about how to get it back on track? You really don't need to reinvent the wheel. A lot of comparisons are made right now between today and the 1970s. I think when you look at Biden's poor polling numbers, it's not just amongst Republicans. It's something like 64% of Democrats don't want Joe Biden to be the nominee in 2024. That's Democrats. I think Jimmy Carter might be the only person who's a fan of Joe Biden because he's no longer the worst president. But you look at the 70s, and if you compare economically, you can look at energy policy, you can look at foreign policy. All the failures on every front were happening in the 70s. They're happening today. The difference is, if you look at the 70s, we didn't have the technology we had today to know that we could supply our own energy needs. Our country was beholden to foreign powers, especially OPEC countries, for our energy. We unleashed American energy during the Trump years, and we did it through very smart policy. It wasn't accidental. The technology was growing, but if you go before, the Obama administration had actually shut a lot of our ability to develop our own resources down. Trump came in and opened things up. And what did that yield? It yielded less than $2 a gallon gasoline. Remember that? It wasn't that long ago. Just a little over 2 years ago, families were paying less than $2 a gallon for gasoline. It's probably the single biggest impact item that affects families when we talk about inflation, because inflation still is the driving issue today, and it's going to be the driving issue in the November elections, which scares the death out of Democrats here who don't want to lose control of power. The thing is, they won't work with us to change the problems that they've created. And they've created all of these. Larry talked really well about the regulatory state overreach. I mean, every federal agency. You pick your agency from the EPA, which is still, even after the Supreme Court ruling, going after every administration, trying to impose the Green New Deal, even though they can't pass it legislatively in a Democrat-controlled Congress. The Department of Energy, you see, their secretary, she laughs when they say, what are you going to do to produce more energy? She laughs about it. She thinks it's funny. It's surely not funny for us. Department of Interior won't issue a single new permit for drilling onshore federal lands. Pipelines. It was not just Keystone, any new pipeline to move energy within this country. So it makes us dependent on foreign nations. That's what's really hurt families. Let's get back to the policies that worked. Open up our energy reserves. Stop printing money. How about that? No more multi-trillion-dollar bills where they're still trying to pass one right now. They're still trying to pass Build Back Better. Larry's best comment, and we use it all the time, is save America, kill the bill. The bill is not dead. As Lindsey over there knows, it's like a zombie that just keeps coming out. You shoot it down, it comes back, and they still want to bring it back again. We've already seen what they've done to wreck our economy with massive spending and crazy far-left socialist regulations. Stop the madness. Help is on the way in November, but for the meantime, we need to stop the damage that's already been done and then focus on reversing it.
We welcome to our panel Senator Lindsey Graham, Senator Cynthia Lummis. Thank you, kids. I appreciate it very much. I hope you voted good up there. Save America, kill the bill. We'll talk about the bill in a moment. We welcome Jason Smith. So can we stop the spending? I mean, I think there is a clear link between the spending and the inflation. And by the way, one of the most troubling aspects of the economic story is the first half is contracting, as I said, GDP is going down. This is a function of the sharp spike of inflation. We have not yet felt the results of the Fed's tightening. And my point here, in brief, I want you all to talk, but I think we need to freeze domestic spending. I think we need to make the Trump tax cuts permanent. I think we have to stop the regulatory state of socialism. I think those instruments stop the spending, keep the tax cuts down, stop the regulations, and we can put some supply-side juice back into the economy. I call it supply-side juice. Now, the Fed will do what it's going to do, but supply-side juice is very much lacking. Can we get it back, Jason?
It's great to be with you, Larry. It's great to be with all of my friends on the panel. But stopping the spending is the first approach. Mm-hmm. If you just last year alone in the House of Representatives, not even counting funding government, Nancy Pelosi pushed through more than $7.5 trillion of new spending on top of funding government. That's hard to imagine what $7.5 trillion is. February of 2021, inflation was 1.7%. That was the first full month of Joe Biden being president. In March is when they passed the $2 trillion American Rescue Plan. They said it was to defeat COVID, but less than 9% actually went towards putting shots in people's arms. The other 91% went towards random things, such as $400 billion to pay people not to work. $400 billion to pay people not to work. Last year alone, 1.6 million people returned to work. Whenever the work requirement lapsed under the child tax credit, in the first 2 months of this year, 1.7 million people returned to work. These were their policies. When you think about the $7.5 trillion bucks being spent, that's $10 million every day since Jesus Christ was born. And you wouldn't even spend $7.5 trillion.
I was there.
But what did people get, Larry, for higher prices to put food on their table or clothes on their backs? They got $783 million checks to prisoners. They got $1,400 stimulus checks to Japanese citizens living in Japan. $2 million to plant trees in Syracuse, New York. $140 million for a hotel in Florida. $2.1 million for a golf course in Florida. $250,000 for pickleball courts in Michigan. That is why every American is paying more to put food on their table, clothes on their backs, and gasoline in their cars. We have to stop the spending. We have to make permanent the Tax Cut and Jobs Act. You know, I worked with you, Larry. I worked with President Trump in 2017, serving on the Ways and Means Committee. And we have several important provisions that are starting to expire this year with expensing. The expensing provision probably led the fire of the greatest economy more than anything. You know, and so if you look at what President Trump did, we had the best economy in my lifetime, the lowest unemployment in 50 years, the lowest unemployment for African Americans, for Hispanic. Think about this, Larry. Real wages have decreased the last 15 months of Joe Biden being president. 102 of the 105 months prior to that, wages increased. Every policy this administration has done has been the wrong policy for the economy. So the way we turn this country around is to do opposite of what Joe Biden tells us to do.
Bob Lighthizer, it seems to me we also have to protect working folks from unfair Chinese trade practices, lack of reciprocity. still going after intellectual property, forced transfer of technology, and so forth. You were a great trade rep. I read that the Bidens are thinking about taking the Trump tariffs back, or some portion of the Trump tariffs, in the name of inflation. What you think about all this?
Well, first of all, it's a pleasure to be here, and you and I are the only unelected people on this panel, which gives us somewhat less status. I want to. So first of all, on where we are now economically, generally, it's quite simple. You elect activist socialists and you put them in government, you're going to get activist socialism. So that's basically what we have. I was there like Larry was in the 70s. He was doing some unimportant job on Wall Street. I was working on the Hill, which most of us will agree was an important job. The only principal difference was that at least the president was someone you could like, right? He was actually a nice person. So should we keep the China tariffs? For sure. China is an existential threat to the United States. They are trying to win a competition between us and them, so that autocracy and militarism and communism dominates the world. It's literally no more complicated than that. But let me make another point. If we're going to have prosperity, for sure we need lower taxes and less regulation and the kinds of things that I would put all these people as kind of Reagan Democrats. Reagan Republicans believe in. All right, every one of them. But we have to do something else, because something has become far more important than when Ronald Reagan was president, and that's the trade deficit. I mean, let me just spend a second on this. The trade deficit last year in goods was $1 trillion. $1 trillion. Larry talks about all the regulation costing us 1% of GDP. Last quarter, the trade deficit cost us 3.5% of GDP. In fact, if you look at, I'm just going to spend one more second. If you look at how GDP is calculated, all right, it's consumption plus investment plus government investment and spending plus trade. All these things were about 2.1% of growth. You add in trade, we went from a reasonable growth scenario to recession. That's how bad the trade problem is. It is the difference right now between us having reasonable growth, not great growth, not Trump growth, but reasonable growth, and a recession. And in 2 days, my guess is the numbers will say the same thing, and we all will know that we are in fact in a recession, and I call it a trade policy recession. And a lot of that is China. A lot of that $1 trillion is China. About 350 billion of it is China, but a lot of it is Europe and other places. And we're losing our manufacturing jobs, we're losing our middle class, and we're destroying the framework of our society, not just by bad policies in spending and inflation, but also by bad trade policies, and we need to turn them around too.
Senators Lummis and Graham, I gave a brief overview of the economy, which is slumping. It's no surprise. I guess what we're trying to focus on is how to regain the high ground, how to regain the economic prosperity that we had in the prior administration and that we've seen in the past. Senator Lummis, what you think?
Well, I absolutely agree that fewer regulations, better trade policies, permanent tax policies that allow people to expense same year will make a huge difference. Yet we are pursuing policies, especially with regard to energy, Larry, that are putting America at a disadvantage. We are tying our hands behind our back deliberately. Right now, the United States only puts out 15% of global greenhouse gases. And yet we continue to double down to make ourselves energy dependent on other countries who are higher emitters of carbon, meaning our policies are hurting the global environment, not helping it. We are also making it so it's unnecessarily high prices for gasoline and diesel. So that makes it so when you're in a drought year like we're having in Wyoming, you pull into a hayfield. You've got half a crop anyway because we're in drought. And you're cutting that hay with $6 a gallon diesel. So what do? You don't cut that hay. You don't buy cattle next year. You don't feed them through the winter. And the whole economy slows down. This is true for other types of agricultural operations as well. So ag is hurt. Oil and gas production is hurt. Jobs are hurt. We have 4 natural gas LNG terminal permits waiting to be approved so we can send our cleaner liquid natural gas over to Europe to help them wean themselves of Russian dirty natural gas, and those permits are sitting there unissued. We are crippling ourselves, and all of the issues that have been raised here are just common sense. Free spending, reduce regulation, make tax cuts permanent, and you'll unleash the economy. This administration is doing the exact opposite, and it is causing inflation. It is causing negative growth, and our nation is hurting. Now, Colorado, my neighbor, because of the high cost of houses, due in part to the fact that we had to raise interest rate, job growth is slowing there. The cost of housing is gone way up because the supply chain issues made it either unaffordable or unavailable to get into new homes. So all these things are happening at once. It's a perfect storm that we can prevent. So Larry, you're spot on. Your panelists are spot on. This is common sense. Even Larry Summers, who is President Obama's economic advisor, is advising what we're discussing today, and it's falling on deaf ears. Some of it. Thank you. Yeah, it's falling on deaf ears. This is common sense.
Let me get this right, Cynthia. First of all, you're fine. Great presentation. I watched President Biden last week, the pre-COVID week. He was doing his fossil fuel day. Oops, I'm sorry, his climate activism day. So he had this picture in this horrible picture. It looked like a Ukrainian battlefield. You know, he's in this. I don't know where he was, and he told us about getting cancer. But he also said that it's very hot in July. We're having a heat wave in July, which is a stunning admission. And therefore, we have to end fossil fuels. Now, that logic is, I called it interplanetary last night. Right? It's hot in July. It's awful here in D.C. I'm sure it's hot in Louisiana. It's very hot in New York City. So let's end fossil fuels. What do you make of that logic?
We're not addressing the problems associated with clean energy, so-called clean energy, for example, at the same time that we're destroying fossil fuels. So rather than investing in carbon capture and sequestration,
right,
which we should, we are not dealing with the fact that when you dispose of solar panels, there's arsenic and other toxins in there that we have to address. We're not addressing the fact that when we retire spent wind turbine towers and the windmills, that they too are introducing toxins into the soil. It's as if there's nothing wrong with those issues, and yet what we know how to use well and can produce in abundance to make the world cleaner is now all of a sudden off the table. If you look at in India, for example, if we would send them oil and natural gas,
LNG,
yeah,
yes,
they could quit burning
coal
and manure.
That's right.
In a lot of homes, they're burning manure, which is very bad for your lungs and for their health. It's very bad for their environment. And all of these things would help improve the environment at very little cost, and yet we turn a blind eye to the rest of the world as if global climate change is not truly global.
That's a great point. Senator Lindsey Graham, welcome. I want to hear your thoughts, but I will say a lot of people, and here at the AFPI, we have a project going, Russ Vogt, myself, Steve Moore, a few others, Brookie Rollins. We would like to develop a balanced budget plan, a pro-growth balanced budget plan that, thank you, folks, that, Lindsey, that, you know, incorporates, yeah, stop the spending, keep the, make the tax cuts permanent, deregulation, and so forth. I think the public would respond very positively to new talk of a balanced budget. What you think, Lindsey?
Well, I think we need to fix the airlines because I got in at 1:30 in the morning. This sucks. You feel like you win the lottery if you get home in the same day you left. So, this is, on a little bit of sleep, here's what I think. I think we better win the next election. I think no policy is going to change until you change the people. I think if Steve Scalise and that crowd were in charge, I would sleep better because I wouldn't have to worry about Joe Manchin 24 hours a day. So here's my message to this crowd, is that we got to focus like our future depends on it to win in 2022. And the best way to win in 2022, and I want to thank the Democratic Party for doing all they can to help us. The question is, are we doing all we can to help ourselves? I would say not. You know why? Because elections are compare and contrast. You want to balance the budget? Great. Let's come up with a plan to do it. How many remember the 1994 contract with America? I do. Shows you how old I am. Bottom line is, I'd like to have an agenda. And number one, I'm here with the fourth wise man. You didn't make it in the book, but you're a good guy. So that's a joke because he said he was at the birth. So the bottom line, and I think he's a wise man. So the bottom line here is if we had an agenda of like what we would do on energy independence and write it down. Start with natural gas as a bridge fuel, right? Yeah. So the Germans, of all people, have built 2 terminals to receive natural gas. They shut down all their nuclear power plants. That's a great idea, wasn't it? Makes you more dependent on Russia. But they're finally waking up a little bit in Germany. They're willing to receive natural gas from America to not have to buy it from Russia. Well, we have policy provisions that are being stopped where we could have a bridge from America to Europe to export our natural gas, which is cleaner, creating jobs here, and screw Putin. Why we don't do that, I don't know. But that's what I'd like to pursue. When it comes to balancing the budget, who's the stop spending guy? Well, how many of you believe that Social Security is going bankrupt in 2032? Well, you ought to all believe it because it is. So what we got to do is come up with a balanced budget proposal that grows the economy. Discretionary spending is about 27% of the federal budget. Interest on the debt's about 17%. The rest is Medicare, Social Security, and entitlements. Count me in for coming up with a logical plan to get us from becoming Greece. But I just want to end with this. You're going to have a speaker at 3 o'clock. It won't be me. I like him a lot, and I miss him. Here's my urging to Larry and border-adjusted carbon tax to get China and India to play is a really good idea for conservatives to make sure that if you're going down the low-carbon road, make sure other people follow you, like the big emitters. So what I would just want to end on this, we need a positive agenda to show people it doesn't have to be this way. You don't have to live like this. You don't have to live with rampant crime, broken borders, get a mortgage on your car, your house to fill up your car, get nothing for $100 at the grocery store. There's a better way. The better way is the American First way. Let's write it down.
Lindsey, Senator, just to follow up, you're the ranking on budget, right?
Yes.
So you're going to be the next budget chair.
Either me or Bernie. And you may not even like me, but I'm a better pick than Bernie.
Duly noted. So just two quick questions on this. On the spending side, we should, I think you would agree, but we should start to look at these mandatory programs, food stamps, welfare, housing subsidies, all these subsidies, and Senator, put back the work requirement provisions that have been taken out. But that if you go back to the Gingrich Republican Clinton deal in the 90s, were vastly popular. Jason mentioned it. And this is a big, we're having an inflated recovery. The unemployment rate is 3.5%, some such, but the spending on these small entitlements, so-called, continues to rise. We are paying people not to work. And by the by, we had Alicia Finley of the Wall Street Journal editorial board. When you look at this and do the studies like they just did at Harvard, those people who are getting paid not to work are not happy. Their lives deteriorated. So that's a big chunk of the budget. It's not counted as discretionary, but it shouldn't be an untouchable entitlement.
Well, if I get to be budget chairman, we're going to have a serious discussion about how to save America from oblivion. We're going to talk about don't pay people more not to work than to work because they'll take you up on it.
Right. Right.
We're going to talk about subsidies for Obamacare. And this new package that Joe mentioned is on again, off again. It's going to price fix prescription drugs. The pharmaceutical industry under President Trump developed vaccines in record time. Now, we're still getting infected, but the death rate is way down. I think one of the biggest accomplishments of the Trump administration was to break the back of the bureaucracy and let the private sector develop drugs that kept a lot of people alive. Well, if you price fix, you're going to kill the goose that laid the golden egg. So, but there's subsidies in this new package, too. Under Build Back Better, they created a subsidy for people on Obamacare up to $100,000. That is ridiculous. Now, they extend it for 2 years, but how many of you think they just want it for 2 years? If you extended the cost of the subsidy out for 10 years, it adds $260 billion to the deficit. So this new approach is a friggin' lie. It does add to the deficit. Now, do you agree the Republican Party has got its, that we're not pure on spending? We need to get back to the party that says that you got to live within your means. You got to have a budget hearing about what you can afford and what you can't. What's the most important? To me, it's national security. If Putin gets away with destroying the Ukraine, that's the 4th and 5th largest producer of grain and corn in the world. He'd have a monopoly. If Taiwan goes to China, 90% of the high-end chips are made in Taiwan. You'll give 2 dictatorships economic control of the world. So the bottom line here is that Donald Trump took a broken military and he rebuilt it. He took a country that was dependent on foreign oil and made us energy independent. He took a border that was broken and it made it the most secure in the history of our country. He made Mexico afraid of us. He made China afraid of us. Why did Mexico help us and remain in Mexico policy? Because after Trump whacked China with my friend here, Mr. Lighthizer, the Mexicans believed if he'll do that to China, what the hell would he do to me? You know what's missing in the world? Not a damn person in the world is afraid of America. We need to instill fear in the bad guys and hope in the good guys.
Thank you. That's great. Terrific. Can I ask House people, start with Steve, the controversy right now on spending is this $250 billion bill to help the semiconductor industry. I myself have grave doubts about it. But, I mean, if the GOP is the party to limit, freeze, or cut spending, here we go, $250 billion. It's essentially a Democratic bill, but it got 16 votes, Republican votes in the Senate. I reckon it's going to pass. Will it go through the House? Should it go through the House?
I wish it wouldn't. And if you think about it, maybe 20% of that bill at most even deals with chip manufacturing in America, which we ought to be bringing back anyway. 80%, and the bill keeps growing. I mean, every week that goes by, a bill that started as a $50 billion bill, mostly paid for, became a $200+ billion bill, completely unpaid for. That's moving right now through the United States Senate, could pass as early as this week. These are all the things that we ought to be very concerned about. These are the bills we need to be stopping. And look, what Biden did the day he came in started it used to be hundreds of billions. Remember when Obama was president? You know, they did cap and trade to try to wreck the energy economy. Then they did Obamacare to wreck our healthcare economy and go to single payer. Then they did the stimulus bill, which was $700 billion, which back then was way too much. Today it's still way too much, but now it's trillions, not billions, that they're dealing with. And you wonder why inflation's out of control. You wonder why gas prices are high. You wonder why the border's not secure. And you wonder why a terrorist organization now controls Afghanistan after all the brilliant advisors in the Biden administration said it wouldn't happen. And they were wrong on everything else, too.
Thank you for that. Jason, just to I don't want to obsess about this, but it is an important piece of legislation. Wouldn't it be better, instead of picking winners and losers here, to just extend the 100% expensing provision for plants and equipment and machinery? This would help the chip industry, but it also would help every other industry. My concern, and you know, we had this discussion in the White House towards the end, and President Trump never really wanted this kind of assistance. He didn't like putting money for, you know, picking winners. He would say, all right, you want subsidized chips, well, why don't we subsidize farmers? Why don't we subsidize steel? They're all important. They're all important. I mean, we have to have a strong defense. We're going to need steel. We're going to need aluminum. We're going to need a lot. We're going to need oil and gas. So why not extend the expensing provision? Why not make the research and development tax credit? You could expense that 100%, by the way. Kevin Brady's stuff coming out of Ways and Means just shows how much less that would cost. You follow? And then we don't have, we'd help all of industry, and we'd develop more onshoring incentives, et cetera, et cetera. It'd be a whole lot cheaper.
Yeah. First off, in regards to the CHIPS bill, a huge concern. We talk about mandatory spending. This adds billions of dollars of more mandatory spending that takes away discretionary spending from Congress.
I didn't know this about mandatory side.
It does. And so there is a better way to have a better CHIPS bill without the mandatory spending. But when you're talking about the tax policy, that's what's on the ballot in November. That's why this election's so important, because our policies, our ways, is to make expensing 100% permanent, or at least extend it, because it's starting to phase out this year. 199A, which is the 20% deduction for small businesses, which make up more than 80 to 90% of all the businesses. That expires in 2025. R&D tax credit, it's expired right now, which Senator Young tried very aggressively to get it on the CHIPS bill over in the Senate side.
I didn't know that.
These are things that have to be done, and that's what will turn the economy around.
Bob Lighthizer, I know you like the concept of the bill, but I'm not sure you really like the bill, do you?
Well,
you know, you can tell me confidentially. No one is going
for me to have a
tune
view
in on
different
this.
than everyone else in a room. So that's been the story of my life. So let me go back to basics. We're in this existential battle with China. I mean, literally, whether or not our children are going to have prosperity. The battleground for that war is technology and chips. That's who's going to win and who's going to lose. Right now, the United States makes 13% of their chips and 0% of any of the high-tech chips, any of the high-end logic chips. Zero. You fly that F-35, it doesn't have American chips in it. Just think about this, those tanks that we're driving. And in terms of picking winners and losers, look at every industry you name stops without chips. I mean, do you think you can make automobiles? We all know that. Christ, most of us ordered cars 2 or 3 years ago and we haven't got it. You can't make cars. You can't make steel. You can't make pharmaceuticals. You can't make machinery. You can't do high-tech processing. You can't do any of these without chips. We invented this bloody area and we're completely pushed out of it. Now, why? because everyone else is subsidizing it. So in the last few months, since some people have made their decision on where they were, the following people have announced they're going to subsidize, bigger than us, by the way: Europe, Japan, Korea, China, more than $1 trillion. If you're in a knife fight for your life, you don't use the Marquis of Queensberry rule book. You go out there and you do what you have to do to win. Now, is this good? I'm sure it's poorly drafted. I told Larry yesterday on television the sainted Reagan economic package, which he worked on in the White House and I worked on the Hill, had flaws, right? It was a compromise. You come along the next day and you fix it. And we're in the position where we're going to have Republicans be able to come along and fix this thing. But the notion that you're going to send a signal to the world that we're not going to compete with all the other economies that matter on the most important playing ground is, in me, insanity. And some level of inefficiency exists in everything that comes out of Congress. Just fix it.
You know, I would, because I agree with the principles that you espouse, I would suggest there's better, more efficient ways to do it than outspending China. I mean, we went through the Japanese thing back, and those economies that spend and spend and spend and subsidize do very poorly in the long run. Those economies that are free and open incentive do very well in the long run. We're not going to settle this here. I know it's a controversial issue, but I would say to you, Lindsey, because you're pivotal in this, if it's possible to help the chip industry, because it is a matter of national security. I agree with you. I agree with Bob Lighthizer. But is it possible? I mean, look, there's a $50 billion subsidy for the Energy Department. I mean, you can't convince me that that has anything to do with chips. It's cylindric to the 10th or 20th power. That's the stuff that bothers us. The Commerce Department has a slush fund in this bill. That's the stuff that bothers us. In other words, what Tom Cotton said to me on TV the other night, he said, yes, the Democrats are scratching every itch in this bill. And I just think we have to put up a better messaging to get it through. I'll give you the last word. We're out of time.
Well, number one, this is what happens when they're in charge and we're not. If Steve was in charge, we'd have a better bill because we'd have better negotiating. I know I'm like a broken record here. What Bob said about, do you understand how exposed we are as a nation? There are 40,000 chips in an electric car, and whether you like it or not, every car manufacturer in the world is moving toward electric vehicles. What does that mean? That means batteries become more important, right? Well, where's all the stuff to make a battery at? China. So what I want President Trump to do is to talk about the complex nature of the world in a simple way. If you give me another chance at this thing, I'm going to turn the board around in weeks, not years. Right? Every cop going to work will feel better when I'm president. The Chinese are going to be, we're going to take a gun to a knife fight when it comes to China. And we'd like to be their friend, but it's up to them. So the CHIPS bill is a result of where we are as a nation. The $50 billion package was absolutely necessary to get onshoring. 90% of the high-end chips in the entire world are made where? Taiwan. If you get Ukraine wrong, there goes Taiwan. The bottom line is, do you want Communist China to have the complete monopoly on the one thing everybody needs, from making a refrigerator to anything? So this is the world in which we live in. So I'm going to try to get as much back into America as I can, and I will not have clean hands in the process. Our national security depends on having a supply chain on the medical side where we don't depend on the Communist Chinese when we get sick, to make our own masks, make our own gowns, and to make our own chips. Now, this lady here is a great conservative from an energy-rich state. So we have a chance to be energy independent again, and all we have to do is use what God gave us, right? We can help the Europeans be less dependent on Putin's oil and gas if we had a rational policy. So President Trump's going to speak at 3 o'clock. I hope he runs again. And let me tell you why. And I know I'm going on too long. If you think Trump is bad for the party, I disagree with you. I think President Trump is good for the party. Let me tell you why. President Trump has gotten people who wouldn't give me or Romney or anybody else the time of day. They believe that he is on their side. You know, what happened with me and Trump, Larry? Well, we found common ground. You know, I was one of the 16 guys that ran against him, and if you don't remember, it's really not your fault. It didn't last that long on my part.
I remember.
Well,
I interviewed you on another network.
Yeah, so I'm going to close with this thought. Well, what happened?
But you're moving towards redemption. Beautiful.
Yeah, I am. I'm trying. I'm trying to move toward a strong America, and he's the vehicle to get us there. So here's what I'm trying to do. After I lost, I took my loss. You know, he beat my brains out. Who am I to give him advice? Then we went over to the White House. We had dinner, and we started playing golf. And here's what happened. We found something in common. I've come to like him, and he likes him. And that gets us through 18 holes with plenty to talk about. So what I hope happen after all this is that we will come out of this election stronger, that Steve Scalise will be in a dominant position along with Kevin McCarthy. We can take back the Senate, where I'm the budget chairman, not Bernie. And the key figure in all this from our side is Donald Trump. So, Mr. President, you're not here now, but you'll be here in a little bit. What I ask you to do is to lay out a hopeful agenda for America.
Yes.
Tell us how we can make chips without spending all this money.
Yes.
Tell us how we can be safer. You don't have to worry about your kids as much as you do today. You did it once, you can do it again. Yes. God bless you all.
Yes, yes. Lindsey Graham, Cynthia Lummis, Bob Lighthizer, Jason Smith, Steve Scalise. Thank you, kids. Fabulous stuff. Fabulous stuff. Thank you.
All right, a great panel.